Low clouds sat over the Mecklenburg Lakes in August 1940. Rechlin lay north of Berlin, wet grass under a dead sky. It was the Luftwaffe's main test center. A captured hurricane stood on the apron with a black cross on its flank. 6 weeks earlier, that same airframe had worn RAF roundels in France. Now, Werner Mulders walked toward it. He was 27. He already had 25 victories from Spain and France. He commanded Jagdgeschwader 51. The order was direct: fly the British fighter, then fly his own Bf 109 against it, then write down what he found. No room for guesswork. He climbed in. The gauges were marked in feet and miles per hour. The stick felt light at neutral. Under load, it grew heavier than he expected. Then he snapped it forward. The engine coughed. The carburetor cut. His own fuel-injected Daimler-Benz would not do that. He wrote the detail down at once. That single note did not stay in the cockpit. It became a drill. Pull -G away from a hurricane, and the hurricane could not follow. Simple, brutal in practice. Mulders had found the one move that mattered. He did not mock the airplane. He called it good-natured. He said it turned well. He said it was childishly easy to take off and land. Then he wrote the sentence that would move through Luftwaffe fighter units in France within weeks. Its performance is decidedly inferior to that of the Me 109. At the moment he wrote it, hurricanes were already tearing into German formations over Britain. They would account for 656 Luftwaffe losses in the campaign. The Spitfire would account for 529. Roughly 60% of Fighter Command's victories came from the aircraft he had just dismissed. He measured one airframe. Britain kept counting the losses. That count looked precise. It was already missing the coast. Since 1935, Luftwaffe officers had been hardening around one belief: air power could end a campaign in weeks, not months. Poland took 27 days. The Low Countries and France took 63. Norway fit the same pattern. The Luftwaffe smashed the enemy air force, then hit the army, then watched German divisions move in behind. The model worked for them. It worked because the last victories looked like proof. Each victory trained the staff to expect the next one to collapse just as fast. The men writing that judgment were not amateurs. Goering had flown with Richthofen in 1918. Kesselring came from the old general's staff. Sperle had built the Condor Legion in Spain. Galland and Mulders carried combat hours their British counterparts could only envy. On July 16, 1940, Joseph Schmidt handed in a comparative study of RAF and Luftwaffe striking power. His colleagues called him Beppo. Later readers folded the paper into Studia Blau. He put Britain at about 900 fighters, with 675 serviceable. The real fighter command figure was 622, close enough for the staff. Then he guessed monthly fighter production at around 250. July produced 496, more than double on paper. That gap turned a neat table into a bad estimate. A count of airframes cannot see factories. It cannot see the next week. Confidence after Poland and France turned old data into an official answer. Schmidt's paper became the view from headquarters, not just a file on a desk. Schmidt also left out the part that mattered most. The coastal radar line already ran along the east and south coasts. It warned controllers before raids crossed the water. The report never named Chain Home. No early warning entered the page. Too little for any staff. So the staff saw limited fighters, slow replacement, and a campaign that looked short. They did not see an air defense that could spot incoming bombers and bring up squadrons in time. A radar return mattered more than a fighter count when raids came over the sea. It gave Fighter Command the minutes that paper planning never saw. The paper made Britain look finite. The radar line said otherwise. It made the fight look short. It was going to be long. That narrow paper verdict was real. It still missed the war Britain was actually fighting. The Bf-109 was faster in level flight. It climbed better at most heights. Its Daimler-Benz engine had fuel injection, so it did not cough under -G. It carried a 20mm cannon plus machine guns. The Hurricane and the Spitfire carried only 8 rifle-caliber Brownings. On a fighter-to-fighter sheet, the German aircraft won. That part was not a mistake. Schmidt was not wrong there. Mulders was not wrong either. The Hurricane was inferior to the Bf-109 in measurable terms. The frame was weaker. The Luftwaffe liked that kind of answer. It had built its view of war on a simple rule. Aircraft fought aircraft. The better machine won. That rule held over Warsaw. It held over Rotterdam. It held over Sedan. There, the enemy had no integrated air defense, no radar, no ground-controlled interception, no real reserves, and no industry able to replace losses in real time. The British were different. They made Germany measure more than speed and climb. They had radar. They had sector stations. They had reserves ready to rise again. The Luftwaffe had looked only at the duel in the air. Then came time. 13th of August. Adlerangriff, Eagle Day. That was the opening strike. Goering's planners told him Fighter Command could be cleared from southeast England in 4 days. They told him the RAF could be broken in roughly 4 weeks. 4 days, 4 weeks. That logic had worked in Poland. It had worked in Norway. It had worked in France. So the calendar looked clean on paper. The Channel looked manageable. London looked reachable. By the end of September, perhaps sooner, German soldiers in flat-bottomed barges were expected to wade ashore on the Sussex beaches. The model had never failed before. That was the trap. It was about to fail over England, and the Hurricane would expose why. Before the raids over England, Cam started from a question no other European designer seemed to ask. He was the son of a Windsor carpenter, and he began as an apprentice making aircraft components by hand. No university education ever came. No welding held the frame. No glamour changed the result. He became chief designer at Hawker in 1925 and stayed there for more than 40 years. In 1934, the Air Ministry asked for a new monoplane fighter. Cam did not start with engine figures or speed tables. He started with the hangar in Wiltshire at 3 o'clock in winter rain. He asked what an RAF squadron could service there by hand in the dark. That question drove the whole airframe. He chose a steel tube frame, bolted rather than welded, because battle damage could crack a welded joint. He closed it with wooden formers, stringers, and doped Irish linen. The forward fuselage wore metal panels, and the wings eventually went all metal. The undercarriage was wide, and the wheels rolled inward into bays in the wings. Every piece was meant for a fitter with hand tools. Repair time mattered more than polish. Tight time meant more sorties. He did not build the most advanced fighter in the world. He did not even try. Reginald Mitchell was building that aircraft, and its name was the Spitfire. Cam built something different. He built an aircraft Britain could afford to lose. Cam built something else instead. The numbers show why. A Hurricane took 10,300 man-hours to build, while a Spitfire took 15,200. Between sorties, the Hurricane could be rearmed and refueled in 9 minutes. The Spitfire needed 26. 9 minutes kept aircraft moving. 26 minutes held them on the ground. The prototype flew at Brooklands on the 6th of November, 1935, with George Bullman in the cockpit. Afterward, Bullman said it was simple to fly and had no apparent vices. Those were the words of a workshop, not glory words. By then, the numbers had already taken over. Near 3,000 Hurricanes sat in fighter command by summer. That put them ahead of the Spitfire by roughly 3-2. In July, the month Beppo Schmidt was writing, there were 396 operational Hurricanes against 228 Spitfires. By September, 33 squadrons flew Hurricanes against 19 on Spitfires. The Luftwaffe pilots over Kent missed the real point. The thick fabric-covered wing gave Hurricane a steady gun platform. 8 Brownings sat in 2 tight groups of 4, close to the fuselage. That mattered. When the guns fired, the recoil did not kick the airframe sideways the way the Spitfire's wider spacing could. The cone of fire stayed tight. Against bombers heading for airfields, factories, and cities, that was the difference. Peter Townsend of 85 Squadron knew it from the cockpit. He later wrote in Duel of Eagles that the Hurricane was rock solid as a platform for 8 Browning machine guns. He also admitted it lacked the speed and glamour of the Spitfire. German pilots even developed a snobbish taste for being shot down by Spitfires. Then came Townsend's line. In the aggregate, the Hurricane would do greater damage among the Luftwaffe. That was the part the German reports missed. The ground crews knew the rest. In August and September of 1940, they turned Hurricanes around in 9 minutes, again and again. Men like Townsend kept flying. They were exhausted. They buried friends every week. The aircraft went back up anyway. That turnaround rate hid the larger mistake. Werner Mulders climbed into a Hurricane marked DF plus GC, and a British airframe from France pushed the Luftwaffe back toward the same bad reading from Rechlin. The first captured Hurricanes were rolled out of fields in northern France in May and June of 1940. The RAF had sent 4 squadrons to France at the start of the war, and by the Dunkirk evacuation they had lost most of their machines to combat, empty tanks, and airfields taken intact. In France, 178 Hurricanes stayed behind. That was roughly half of Fighter Command's operational strength on the day the Battle of Britain began. At least 3 of those aircraft went on to Rechlin, the Luftwaffe test center, where one machine with an unknown British serial was repainted with German crosses and the code DF plus GC. Mulders and other pilots flew comparative trials in it, and the trophy showed them the fighter's shape, but not the speed with which Britain kept losing, repairing, rearming, and returning Hurricanes to the line. In Rechlin, the captured Hurricane went into the file as the weaker aircraft. By July, the aircraft Berlin treated as Britain's second name was leaving British factories by the hundreds, not in trickles. One question never reached Beppo Schmidt's desk on the 16th of July, 1940. If the German fighter held the edge in comparison flights, why did Britain keep building Hurricanes at this pace? Not aerodynamics. Replacement decided it. Britain had created the Ministry of Aircraft Production that spring, and Churchill put Lord Beaverbrook, the Canadian newspaper proprietor, in charge almost at once. The trial reports mattered, but the monthly tables mattered more. In June, British industry produced 446 fighters. In July, it produced 496, and the line kept climbing under pressure. Germany produced 240 fighters in that same month, and those dry figures meant next week's squadrons, not next year's plans. Beaverbrook drove factories, seized aluminium, and cut procurement delays across suppliers and ministries until output kept rising under attack. By the end of August, that arithmetic was reaching the front every day. Goering was telling fighter commanders that Fighter Command was finished, yet British plants were sending replacement fighters out faster than the Luftwaffe could shoot them down, which turned every German claim of collapse into a counting error. RAF fighter strength rose from 644 at the start of July to 732 at the start of October. The count went up. That brought the argument back to the fighter Rechlin had marked down. At the end of the battle, Fighter Command's official accounting credited the Hurricane with 656 enemy aircraft destroyed. The Spitfire received 529. That gave the Hurricane about 3/5 of Fighter Command's kills and the higher total of Britain's 2 main fighters, despite the German verdict on paper. Officially, the Hurricane destroyed 656 enemy aircraft. The headline total hides what the Germans misread. The Hurricane was not piling up its score in elegant fighter duels. On average, it destroyed 3 German aircraft for every 2 credited to the Spitfire, and much of that margin came from bombers. That was the British measure. Bombers were the aircraft trying to break Britain. German planners kept looking first at speed, climb, and handling. British commanders counted what fell before it reached airfields, ports, factories, and cities. The difference was concrete. A fighter that cut into bomber streams solved the urgent problem, even if another fighter looked cleaner on paper. In that summer, bomber kills carried the real weight. That is why the answer was not easy to copy. The Bf-109 demanded compound curves, stressed skin panels, and skilled hands trained to fit them well. Messerschmitt built for the factories he had, and German workers were trained for that standard of work. There was little room for a rough, cheap alternative. Beppo Schmidt's ceiling of 250 fighters a month matched what German plants and labor allocation could actually sustain. Britain had chosen a different path before the battle peaked. Sidney Cam, Hawker's chief designer and the son of a Windsor carpenter, shaped the Hurricane for serial production and quick repair. The airframe accepted simpler methods. Damaged sections could be cut out, patched, recovered, and sent back. Britain needed an aircraft it could keep in service in numbers. That logic showed up on the production lines. Hurricanes left Hawker's factory at Kingston. More came off the line at Gloucester Aircraft in Brockworth. In Canada, Canadian Car and Foundry built them at Fort William under engineer Elsie McGill, the first woman to design and build a fighter aircraft. One battle drew on factories from 2 continents. Then the repair loop tightened the advantage again. Ground crews did not need a long shop stay for every torn panel or punctured section. An apprentice fitter with hand tools could patch damage on a wet forward airfield through the night, and a machine hit by day could return by the next morning. That turned modest flight performance into a steady combat total. 3 production lines on 2 continents kept feeding squadrons, and hand tools could put a Hurricane back into the fight after one rainy night. Each repaired Hurricane that rejoined a squadron in 1940 led back to a name: Pilots First. Fighter Command drew men from Britain, the Commonwealth, and occupied Europe, not from one island alone. Fitters had names. Women on Hawker production lines had names, and fire watchers in Kent, Sussex, and South London tracked the battle from dark rooftop posts. Squadron, factory shift, watch post. Those names led upward into reports, loss tables, and conference rooms. By the 3rd week of August, Adolf Galland could read the same battle in his evening logs and see that Beppo Schmidt's pre-war picture no longer held. The 4-day estimate had failed. After Eagle Day on August 13th and the hard fighting on August 18th, the Luftwaffe had lost more than 120 aircraft in less than a week, yet British fighters still reached almost every target. Each evening, Galland checked the records for Jagdgeschwader 26 on the Channel coast and found the same mismatch. He saw that gap nightly. He knew the Bf-109 gave him the stronger attacking machine in a single clash, and he later said so plainly in print. But Goering kept pushing his fighters into close escort, and that mission cut against the aircraft's strengths. The Channel crossing already burned fuel, and over southern England, a Bf-109 often had only a narrow margin for combat before turning back. In close escort, the pilot stayed tied to the bombers, held speed, and gave away room to dive, climb, and brake. Later films sharpened that frustration into a cleaner line than the record gives us. In one screen version, Galland snaps that he wants a squadron of Spitfires. His own memoir, The First and the Last, published in 1953, says less and reveals more. When Reichsmarschall Goering asked what equipment his squadrons needed, Galland wrote that he would have liked an outfit of Spitfires for his unit. That was not a verdict on the whole air war. Galland also wrote that the Bf-109 was superior in the attack, so his request read as a complaint about escort duty, not an admission that the German fighter had failed. That omission matters right here. Galland ended the war with 104 confirmed victories, and few Luftwaffe commanders understood fighter combat better. Yet in the request, he left Hurricane out. The aircraft taking the heavier share of German losses still did not rise high enough in that argument to earn its own name. In The First and the Last, Galland fixed a dispute over escort in writing, and Hurricane remained absent from the document. While headquarters argued over escorts on paper, the price appeared over Southampton. On the 16th of August 1940, 23-year-old Flight Lieutenant James Brindley Nicholson lifted for his first combat patrol in Hurricane P-3576, code GNA, of 249th Squadron. Then 4 cannon shells struck in quick succession. One tore through the cockpit hood and wounded his eye, one smashed his left foot, one set the fuel tank on fire, and the instrument panel broke apart. Flame filled the cockpit. Nicholson started to climb out, and any ordinary reading of the fight ends there. In those seconds, with one eye hurt and his foot shattered, he saw a German fighter pass through his gun sight. He climbed back into the burning cockpit, sat down in the fire, aimed, fired, and shot the aircraft down before he bailed out. That decision moved the Hurricane argument off the page and into a man. After the jump, his burns were so severe that skin came away from his hands, and a Home Guard volunteer on the ground shot him in the leg after mistaking him for a Luftwaffe pilot. Doctors treated him for burns at the Royal Berkshire Hospital. Nicholson became the only fighter command pilot to receive the Victoria Cross in the Second World War. And the London Gazette on the 15th of November 1940 left a dry official line: "Attack and destruction of an enemy fighter from a burning cockpit." While Nicholson recovered, Northolt was already testing the same fighter in a different way. The new unit was Polish. Its pilots had lost their country in 1939, watched France collapse in 1940, and reached Britain after 2 defeats with one clear demand: let them fight again. The RAF slowed them down first, making them learn English before handing them Hurricanes and the number 303. Their first combat sortie came on the 30th of August, 1940. Then the score moved fast. In the next 42 days, 303 Squadron shot down 126 German aircraft. Czech Sergeant Josef František, flying Hurricane R4175 inside the Polish squadron, became the highest-scoring pilot of the whole Battle of Britain, with 17 Luftwaffe aircraft in 6 weeks before a flying accident killed him on the 8th of October. Hugh Dowding later turned that record into an official judgment, writing that without the Polish squadrons, the battle might have ended differently. For number 303, the Hurricane tally was 126 German aircraft in 42 days. Those Polish victories pointed to a larger mistake in German judgment. Rechlin could measure a captured fighter, but it could not measure what Britain kept sending back into the air. That was the real metric. By the end of October, Hurricane units had destroyed 656 enemy aircraft. That was more than half of all fighter command victories. In August 1940, Werner Mulders climbed out of a captured Hurricane at Rechlin. Rechlin was the Luftwaffe's main test center. He wrote a hard verdict: inferior. He had evidence. The Hurricane lagged behind the Bf-109 in speed and climb, carried weaker guns, and its carburetor cut out under -G. On technical measurements, his report was sound. In clean trials, the British fighter lost the comparison. It could not catch a Bf-109 in level flight. It struggled against a fast diving attack. No German pilot reading that table would have asked Hermann Göring for a Hurricane over a Messerschmitt. But command was asking the wrong question. Germany counted aircraft performance. Britain counted sorties. A fighter that landed, took fuel and ammunition, and returned the next day mattered more than one better line in a test report. That is why the report from Rechlin failed to predict the battle's balance. The cost of those weaknesses never disappeared. Hurricane pilots burned in fabric-covered fuselages, and some died in fires that a metal skin might not have turned so deadly. The damage reached East Grinstead. There, Archibald McIndoe treated burned airmen at Queen Victoria Hospital. That wound came from a known weakness in Sidney Cam's design. So Mulders judged the airplane correctly and still lost the argument that mattered. The Luftwaffe had the faster fighter. Britain had the fighter it could keep in the fight. By the end of October, the Hurricane accounted for 656 destroyed enemy aircraft, more than half of Fighter Command's total. Behind that tally stood 9 minutes on the ground. James Brindley Nicholson had already shown the price in the cockpit when he climbed back into a burning Hurricane, shot down an enemy fighter, won the Victoria Cross, and later died in another aircraft over the Bay of Bengal in May 1945. Sergeant Joseph František scored 17 victories with No. 303 Squadron, then died in a hurricane crash at Yeovil on the 8th of October 1940. Peter Tones knew this fighter looked less glamorous than the Spitfire, and he wrote about it anyway. Names matter here. Ground crews refueled and rearmed a Hurricane in 9 minutes, and fitters could patch the torn fabric of a shot-up fuselage in an afternoon. The air smelled of fuel, while mechanics worked the fabric skin with their hands and turned damage into another sortie. Then it flew again. That speed began far from the runway. Sidney Cam drew the Hurricane, Elsie McGill built it in Canada, and Lord Beaverbrook drove output faster than the Luftwaffe could destroy the aircraft already in service. Women stood on assembly lines at Brooklands in Surrey, Brockworth in Gloucestershire, and Fort William in Ontario. More Hurricanes were built than Spitfires. That mattered. So the verdict does not sit in a comparison chart. It sits in a human chain. Nicholson, František, Townsend, Cam, McGill, the women on the lines, and the crews with fuel hoses and ammunition belts. One flight ended, another started. A ground crew refueled and rearmed a Hurricane in 9 minutes and sent it back into the sky.